Welcome to the Bond Analysis, ladies and gentlemen. I have just listened to speech by Raila Odinga in Bondo a day after arriving from China, where he accompanied the president. And of course, Raila was on some campaign tour for AUC. But the news from Thabo Mbeki is more interesting, and I think is more enlightening to Raila Odinga and the four other candidates that are eyeing the position of African Union chairperson. Before we listen to the remarks from Thabo Mbeki, let's get a snippet from Raila Odinga's speech in Bondo.
And I've actually put them down very well in a brochure, which will be made available to you people. But I believe that Africa is punching below its weight, and that Africa can do better. I have seen, African leaders moving around. You see, like I've just come from FOCAC, China, Africa, where over 40 African heads of state were. But I was saying, why should African leaders go to China? Chinese who should be coming to Africa. So these are some of the things that we want to reverse. It should not be reversed, Africa, America, not America, Africa. Not India, Africa. Africa, India. Africa, Turkey, and so on and so forth. Africa can punch at its level. And this is what I want to see. And there are so many things that I've already said about Africa, what Africa can do, how Africa has been undermined, how Africa has been exploited. But we don't want to continue to be whining. We want to continue to do positive things. So as things are right now, I'm moving around, talking to presidents, talking to leadership of the continent, and as you have rightly said, you are all wishing me well and praying for me. In your prayers.
So apparently Raila is asking why 40 African presidents decided to troop to China. And in saying that in his position, if he will be elected as the new chairperson of the African Union, those are some of the things that he will choose to reverse. So it is a matter of wait and see whether Raila will be able to achieve that or will be able to push that agenda of reversing what he's talking about. So interestingly, I've seen people really been reacting to that speech by Raila, asking what changed, because you can't complain about it, but you attended it. So what about it? But that was in a light notice. Now, the gist of this analysis is what Thabo Mbeki is talking about. The former president of South Africa is telling the continent that the African Union is a weak institution despite of all policies on matters of children, governance, human rights, elections, peace and security. Africa Union has all the policies, but there is a problem that the continent must address as a matter of urgency. There is a new way of doing things in Africa that the new leaders that are coming in office must be able to embrace. Let's listen into Thabo Mbeki.
The matter that is being raised about good governance and so on the continent is correctly raised. What I would say about that now is that we are currently, there's a discussion going on, there's a process going on the continent to prepare for the election of the new commission of the African Union next year, in February. And as you know, part of what the AU decided was that this position of chairperson of the commission should rotate among the regions, African regions. And so the region delegated the task to nominate the next chair. Candidate is East Africa. So the matter is with the East African region. what I would have expected is that the East African region would get together and say, who among us from East Africa would be the best candidate for this position of chairperson of the AU Commission? They haven't done that. Instead, you have candidates from Tanzania, from Djibouti, from Kenya, from Somalia, from where? Mauritius. 5 candidates from East Africa. Now you send all of these 5 names to the AU must decide which one. It's an incorrect approach. I'm mentioning it because it's actually a vitally important matter. Because there are many, many, many deficiencies with the current Commission of the African Union. And yet that Commission has got a vital task in addressing exactly these matters that you raise about good governance on the continent. It's a body that should be the African Union. We have a whole multiplicity, I keep raising this thing, of policies. The economy of the continent, the politics of the continent, war and peace, the gender question, women's, children's rights. There are policy positions of the African Union on all of these things. But there's no leadership to make sure that these policies are implemented, and that leadership should reside in that commission. So the election of a new chairperson of the commission is a matter of vital importance for the future of the continent. But the East African region is not giving us any candidate, except a fleet of 5 candidates. That's a particular struggle that we need to engage, including the issue about the selection of such a candidate. You can't just pop up and say, my name is Thabo Mbeki, I want to be chair. Why? Why must we elect you? I'm saying the very process of the election, we were raising issues about that. That these candidates, there needs to be a particular process, transparent. All of Africa can see it. Ask this person. Ask them about the policies of the AU. What do they know? The practices and rules and regulations and all that. So that by the time you say, we hereby elect you as chairperson, you are confident that you are electing somebody who's actually going to do this practical work of making sure that the continent implements the decisions it's taken. You see what is happening in West Africa? A coup takes place in Niger. They remove whoever was president. ECOWAS decides to act against them, including up to the point of even a military intervention. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But because of the way the matter was handled, you've now got 3 countries that have walked out of ECOWAS. It has weakened that regional body. Somebody was telling me the other day that Guinea-Conakry is going to join them. But I'm saying, here's the AU. The AU has got a very important committee called the Committee of the Panel of the Wise. They ought to have seen this thing to say there's problems coming here. How do we intervene? There's no intervention. And those soldiers are raising a very important point. Apart from carrying out coups, they are raising an important point. To end the neo-colonial relationship between France and these African countries. So, my brother, I'm saying that the immediate task we have is the reconstitution of the Commission of the African Union in 3-4 months' time to make sure that it provides the kind of leadership that is required. I see the ambassador here of Western Sahara. Welcome. The matter, that important matter of the admission of Morocco into the AU, that raised very important questions about the issue of Western Sahara. That issue remains unresolved. Somebody sent me some video footage just 3-4 days ago of a conference in Japan. And there you have the Japanese envoy beating up physically the representative of Western Sahara. But I'm saying there's an issue. I saw one of the African countries have now opened a consulate in this territory, which is illegally occupied by Morocco. And the African Union is nowhere to be seen, despite its own policy positions on this matter. That's why this matter about who constitutes the leadership in the Commission of the AU next year becomes of critical importance. Not about the answers, but about the questions. On Sudan, I must put this matter delicately. We are in contact with the Sudanese players. I'm talking about Sudan, the Republic of Sudan. The belligerents, the civilian organizations, with a view to saying to all of them the same thing I was saying about the Eastern DRC. What's the problem? What's the solution? From the Sudanese people themselves. So, in brief, therefore, my brother, my response to this is that, again, I'm now talking from the position of the foundation. We are in touch with all of the belligerents, engaged with them to help to find a solution to the problem. It's clear that the initiatives that have been taken so far, like the Jeddah process with Americans and Saudi Arabia and so on, to find a peaceful solution hasn't worked. Even this last conference that the Americans convened in Geneva, the government, General Burhan, didn't attend. But I'm saying we are in contact with all of these players, with a view to saying, what can we do in order to assist to find a solution? And as you indicated, the one advantage we have is that we've been working, I've been working on the matter of Sudan since 2009, as you indicated, as a consequence of which we're very familiar with the country's challenges. We know quite a lot of the people there, and a lot of them know us, so we're not strangers to one another. And that is why, as I say, when we intervene and say we'll talk to everybody, nobody says go away. I can't say more than that. There will be a conference here next month, October, dealing with issues of peace on the continent. And the Sudan matter serves on that agenda. It will be discussed by the Sudanese themselves, with us here. And all I'm saying is that there is an intervention that we're making with regard to the conflict in Sudan. With regard to Burundi, I must confess, I wouldn't know what exactly is happening in detail in Burundi now. But I think that with regard to the matters that we thought needed to be addressed, the original negotiations that took place in Arusha, and Mandela inherited from Mwalimu Nyerere, the intervention when there was an agreement and we had to send troops to Burundi to protect that government, everything, the negotiations between the armed groups, the FDD and all of that, to lay down arms, all of those interventions which were necessary to bring stability and democracy to Burundi happened. And it seemed to us that we had done what needed to be done with regard to Burundi. I'm not saying the situation is okay. I'm saying I'm not sure what the situation is currently. But in terms of the interventions that had to be made then, to bring to a situation where the Barundi are in a position freely to determine their own future and destiny, that was done. We did what we could. It may very well be that with your advice, we might have to go back again and see what's happening now. But the challenges that were there then, I thought we had done our best to help to address those. But I'm saying that I think we're open to any suggestion from yourselves as to say, but the current situation in Burundi is as follows, in order to say what therefore can be done to respond to the current situation. I'm talking about the situation in the past. The issue about just transition and the point that is being raised is correct. I mean, as developing countries, even the international negotiations on these climate issues, they talk about common but differentiated responses. That differentiation is to take into account the fact that they're developing countries. So there's no expectation that what is expected of America or France or England is necessarily what is expected of the developing countries. So I think that that differentiated response is a very important element in the international negotiations, and I think we as developing countries must bear that in mind and take advantage of that. I mean, take the situation here at home. There is no way that we can provide electricity here without relying in part on the base stations that produce electricity. That's the coal-fired stations. And indeed, what needs to happen is that those coal-fired power stations need renovation. The point that is being raised that they are very old, they are 40 years old, 50 years old, and so is correct. And to respond to that is not necessarily to say shut it down, but to renovate it so that we do indeed have this very strong base, in addition to which you then do the renewables. And I hope the country will take that position. There's a very active discussion taking place with regard to that, to say that fortunately, as you would have seen, one of the documents issued by department before they got changed, Minerals and Energy, it distributed a document 4 or 5 months ago, which said, let's extend the life of the coal-fired power stations, which were supposed to be retired by this and that, by 10 years. It said that it's an official document of government in order to allow the space for the renovation of these stations. So that, as I say, you have this base in terms of the production of electricity, to which you then add the renewables. So that would be, I'm sure, that should be our approach to this matter about climate change and this just transition. Part of what has happened, the issue that is raised about the African Renaissance, part of what has happened in the continent, and don't ask me why, is a very, very clear decline in the levels of commitment to a Pan-African perspective. You see it everywhere, it's very visible. So the matter of a renaissance of the continent, it suffers that kind of fate. When this commitment to a Pan-African perspective dies away, and people are very preoccupied with what happens in my country, which is justified, but does not mean you focus on your country to the exclusion of the continent.
So we just want to do a recap of what the former president of South Africa has spoken about. And I took interest on some 3 key areas where he's strictly or directly addressing Raila Odinga and the 4 other candidates that are actually in it. First, you may need to ask, why has it become difficult? The Eastern Africa Union, the Eastern Africa, to present one candidate. There is a candidate from Kenya, there is a candidate from Djibouti, there is a candidate from Madagascar, there is a candidate from Mauritius. I don't know which one. There are actually 4 candidates. So why has it become difficult? It's straight infiltration of that. I can always tell you that the weakness, the design of the African Union to be weak was well designed by the foreigners who have foreign interest here, especially the West. But I'm taking interest on one thing. Thabo Mbeki is a former president. And as a former president, he's directly saying things that the new crop of African leaders will not want to hear. He's saying that there is a panel of wise men in the African continent, in the African Union, that was supposed to see the danger that was there. When when Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger had their coup d'etats, the ECOWAS, which is the Western Regional Bloc, descended on them with all manner of threats and even threatened to have a military intervention in those countries. Now, the 3 Sahel nations, the nations in the Sahel region, they decided to retaliate by pulling out of ECOWAS. And by design, that regional bloc is actually weakened. Now, we know, and I think as a former president, it will not be cool for people to look at it and say that he's indirectly supporting the coup. He's shied off from hitting directly and saying the coup d'etat is wrong. In fact, of course, there is something that the countries that are doing coup, the militaries that are doing coup, they want to end neo-colonialism, and they're kicking out France and the Western powers that have actually for long been taking advantage of their resources. And even despite of establishing military bases in those countries, not much of success can attributed for the presence of France in those regions. And consequently, Thabo Mbeki is saying that these countries are even leaving, the African Union. So African Union had a blanket approach of saying, of course, because the policy is you can't remove a democratically elected president, there is a blanket policy on knocking them out of ECOWAS, knocking them out of the African Union. And what Thabo Mbeki is warning is that Africa must redefine and must relook at approach, because so many other countries will follow the direction of Botswana, Mali, and Niger. In fact, if you ask, if I may ask, even in Kenya here, show me a footprint, show me something that African Union has done for Kenya in terms of crisis. Be it elections, be it transition, be it what. You know, you cannot feel the presence. The African countries are not feeling the presence of the African Union in their respective countries. And that is what Thabo Mbeki is talking about, and is warning the Railas and the team that are coming or that are eyeing those elections that they must be clear. And they must redefine the leadership of the continental body so that it can resonate with the emerging trends in the continent. The other thing that I've taken so much interest in is you don't just say you want to be. I'm Thabo Mbeki, I want to be African Union chair. He's talking about the process. Is the process going to present a competent candidate? Or it is just a matter of majoritarian rule? Or who is able to lobby, probably in terms of finances or the influence across the continent? That will be very interesting for the 4 candidates to be subjected to a well scrutinized exercise or interviews just to ascertain that what is the competency of so and so in managing this. Lastly, the other message that Thabo Mbeki is giving is about the African Union, as that African Union is a dead body. You know, it's a body that is weak, and if in my opinion it is designed to be weak. It is designed because everything going on there, no one seems to have a voice. It is just at the top, of course, with all manner of the declarations, the policies, but it cannot be felt within the continent. So with the emerging trends, and I've also listened to what Raila is talking about, that we'll have Africa-China summit, not China-Africa summit. It should be the other way around. That Africa should also be able to invite the former presidents, to invite those Western economies to the continent, so that when you speak African issues, we speak African issues here. Instead of one country like China inviting 40 African presidents to China, it is some sort of neocolonialism. So ladies and gentlemen, that is my take, and probably this is some takeaway for Raila Odinga and the team that are eyeing those positions. Thank you.